Waiver Wired Week 4. We're almost a month into the season, heading into Week 4 of the fantasy football year. This has been a wild season, like a really weird one. A lot of injuries. Christian McCaffrey is in Germany visiting a doctor. Like, do we want to hear that? But this has also been a fun one for fantasy managers who want to grind. And this past week was like a really interesting one because we had a couple of blue chip, like marquee names just smashing. Lamar Jackson, right up there in the quarterback finishes. Dak Prescott, really nice matchup for both of those guys fantasy-wise. Dak did it coming from behind. Lamar made some really big plays. That was fun to watch. Running back-wise, Saquon Barkley, great game. Incredible. 2 30-point weeks this year. Saquon might be the number one pick if we draft it again tomorrow. Kyren Williams, huge game. Derrick Henry, huge game. Jonathan Taylor looked really, really good. Tight end-wise, you had the Devonta Smith injury. Dallas Goedert gives you like that one random Dallas Goedert smash week performance we see every single year out of him. Really, really strong game from him. And then wide receiver, you have like new alpha wide receivers. Rashee Rice, Malik Neighbors every single week. These are guys that we're viewing as like top 6 plays at the position. We also had a bounce back from Deontay Johnson. We're going to talk about Andy Dalton a little bit later. Breakout from Rome Odunze. And the number one player, it's funny because the number one player was Jauan Jennings. And if you watched this Waiver Wire show last week, we talked about Jauan Jennings. I didn't have him as my number one wide receiver ad. That was Quentin Johnston. And Quentin Johnston gets a touchdown catch. But Jauan Jennings, what a performance. Like a performance for the ages. And if you started him, you've got to just be extremely excited. It's one of those performances that makes you want to hit the waiver wire every single week. Guys like Jauan Jennings doing this, we usually see it from like a random running back where you use them in a spot start and they give you a huge game. Think about like Dearness Johnson a couple seasons ago who gave you that one massive RB1 overall performance. Weeks like that, you don't usually get it from a waiver wire wide receiver like this, but Jauan Jennings gets 12 targets, 11 catches, 175 yards, 3 touchdowns. I had him as my number one sleeper wide receiver, and hopefully you're watching my sleeper video that drops usually on Saturdays where I give you a couple players that like slide through a lot of waiver wires that you can put in your lineup or stash for this week. So Jauan Jennings, anybody who got him, let us know in the chat if you used him. But what a week. But we got to start talking about week 4 because we're starting to learn some things. You've got 3-week sample size, and it's time to start racking up some W's. Like, our perception of players in the summer is different than what it should be now. Maybe you had high hopes for Javonte Williams. Maybe you had high hopes for DeAndre Swift. Guys like that, you can see writings on the wall, get out of the way. You also see some situations where things start to change. Rachaad White situation with Bucky Irving, that's very fluid right now. So let's just get after it. Let's talk a little bit about this video. Every week on Waiver Wired, I'm going to talk about players that are available in 70% of leagues. That's usually my threshold is 70% of leagues because I don't want to give you too many names that are already rostered in your league. I don't think that's helpful. That's not the kind of Waiver Wire content that I would want to consume. And that's not the kind of Waiver Wire content that I want to put out. But let's talk about a few shallow league ads. And these players are still available in 60% of leagues. And let's talk about at the top, Bucky Irving. I had Bucky Irving as the number 2 waiver wire addition after week 1's performance. That was number 2 in my top 10. Bucky is nasty. Bucky is really, really good. This is a player that I don't want to get too over the top with, but last year we saw 4 sub 200-pound running backs finish as RB1s in points per game. Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyren Williams, James Cook, and Devon Achane. Bucky Irving lacks the straight line speed of like certainly of a Devon Achane or a Jahmyr Gibbs, but he is incredibly shifty and much quicker and faster with pads on than he was at the NFL Combine. And he wasn't like slow. It was a size adjusted speed where we wanted to see him run in like the 4.3s. He was a little bit fast, a little bit slower than that, but this is a guy that could be stepping into a huge role. He already looks like the more efficient runner in Tampa Bay, but it looks like he could also cut into some more work as a receiver. He had 3 catches this past week. If he's available in your league, make it rain. We also want to make it rain on Braelon Allen. Braelon Allen has the number one waiver wire addition last week, and this is really becoming a two-man backfield. Breece Hall is still crushing in terms of fantasy scoring, but in terms of his overall usage, his overall time on the field, that's slipping a little bit. And the reason is Braelon Allen is really, really good, and the Jets have sort of figured out their identity. They have won 2 games in a row with Braelon Allen ticking up. Braelon Allen is a beast. Braelon Allen is probably a top 20 back in this league right now, and I don't think I'm over the top saying that. He checks off every single box. He's 20 years old. He can catch the football. He's a strong runner. He initiates contact, and he can take on contact, and he's shiftier than a big 235, 245-pound back should be. So these 2 rookie running backs need to be absolute priorities if they're available to you on your waiver wire. Also talking about Cole Kmet, who's a little bit too highly rostered to make our top 10, but he looked like the big beneficiary of Keenan Allen missing. Cole Kmet last year was very, very strong. He was an early waiver wire guy that we were ranking early in the year. Then he became too widely rostered, ended up finishing as a tight end 1, but this past week gives you 11 targets, 10 catch performance, scores a touchdown, and he did it during Rome Odunze's breakout performance. So Cole Kmet, if you need a tight end, he's available in your league. Go ahead and grab him. Quentin Johnston, we had him as our number 1 waiver wire wide receiver last week. Now he's rostered in a little bit too many leagues for me to rank this week, but he scored a touchdown again. There's some people out there saying it was like a busted coverage, whatever. The guy's scoring touchdowns, had 2 last week, 1 this week. He is their red zone touchdown earner, like a high value target type player. He's going to get those end zone looks. He's seeing enough of a target share to be viable, and he's only in year 2. Was a first round pick. Like, this is sort of like we talked about at the beginning of the show. Like, get your preconceived notions of players last year out of there, because I have 3 weeks of sample size with Quentin Johnston with a new coaching staff and a new role and a larger role, and he's performing well with it. So Quentin Johnston, if he's still available, grab him. And then Rico Dowdle, we haven't really seen anything in terms of big-time production, but he continues to catch passes, and he's starting to dominate the usage of among the Dallas running backs. He's so far ahead of Zeke Elliott right now, it's not even funny. Then Cam Akers, like Jauan Jennings, and also like Sam Darnold, which we're going to talk about in a minute, were my 3 players that I listed at the top of their positions in my sleepers video. Make sure you're watching that and on Friday or Saturday when it drops. It's also an article on playerprofiler.com. But Cam Akers, he had a very solid usage in terms of snaps, but this matchup turned out to be really, really tough for Houston. Akers still scored a touchdown, but I think that if he gets another week as the starting running back with Joe Mixon out, then I think Akers could have a much better performance against Jacksonville on a short week. I'm recording this before Monday Night Football, but I would expect that Jacksonville coming off that Bills game, that's going to be a tough one for them against Houston, with Houston coming off of a loss. We're going to take a quick break, and we come back. We're going to go over every single position. We're going to go over multiple options that you can add in your leagues. We got a lot of names this week. I didn't want to have to go this deep, but we're there. Every week, I feel like we're going deeper and deeper here on Waiver Wired, but we want to give you players that you can add to your roster and make your fantasy team look better.
Say what you want about fantasy football. You can't say it's not a game of skill. My favorite game of skill during the NFL season, these underdog pick'em contests. You pick 6, you can 100x your payout. Just pick a game, just one game. Stack that game. Think week 1, Vikings-Giants. Joe Schoen, he doesn't know what he's doing. I watched Hard Knocks. Daniel Jones is what we thought he was. Less than on Daniel Jones. Less than on Malik Neighbors. Less than on Devin Singletary. And Sam Darnold, better than advertised. Sam Darnold, more than. Justin Jefferson, more than. Aaron Jones, more than. Boom, 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 boom. 100 extra payout on Underdog right now. Use promo code Underworld. You get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've raised the maximum bonus from $100 to $125. You put in $250, you get $125 in bonus cash. Who doesn't love that with promo code Underworld? Now go start picking.
Welcome back to Waiver Wired. I'm Theo Gremminger, giving you all of your top waiver wire additions for this week heading into week 4. Let's start out at the quarterback position, and this player is actually my number 1 overall ad this week, and it's actually Sam Darnold. And Sam Darnold is sort of a no-brainer addition. He's passed huge tests here. We saw him beat the San Francisco 49ers last week, and he had 2 touchdown passes. And he was converting big play after big play towards the end of the game against the 49ers with Justin Jefferson on the sideline banged up. So we were already on him last week, but now it's like this guy is just playing on another planet. And he is having a career renaissance here in Minnesota. Much like we saw with Baker Mayfield last year in Tampa, Darnold's going to challenge for a top 12 finish, if not like a top 8 finish. He's unbelievably locked in this offense. He had 4 touchdown passes, and he's done it every week with less than 30 pass attempts. So he's had multiple touchdown passes in every single week, and his passing volume has been low. So if they ever get into a game where it gets into a real shootout, we might see a potential real spike week from Darnold. And any way you cut it, he's still giving you top 5 quarterback production throughout this season. Darnold is a player that also is going to get back TJ Hawkinson, and he's going to get back Jordan Addison pretty soon. So I value Sam Darnold as the number 1 waiver wire addition at the quarterback position, and really for everybody this week, because I think that his production is going to last. And I actually think if you're a dynasty manager, Sam Darnold's the guy you want to go kick the tires on. Just because J.J. McCarthy was drafted doesn't mean he's going to earn this job back. Darnold has played that well that I don't think it's a foregone conclusion he can't win this job for 2 straight seasons. So Darnold's a no-brainer addition in every single league. And another player who I've been talking about every week, and we've just sort of been waiting, and we're starting to see a little bit more fantasy production, and that's Justin Fields. This past week, we saw Justin Fields pass for 245 yards. We also saw him throw for a touchdown pass, and he found the end zone as a runner. So for me, we're starting to see Justin Fields in a situation where we might see something similar to last year, which is Justin Fields with spike weeks. He's had 3 difficult games where the Steelers have been somewhat conservative in their approach, and Justin Fields is now 3-0 as a starter. Goes into Atlanta and wins, goes into Denver and wins, and then wins his opening game against the LA Chargers. Justin Fields is also in my top 10 additions at the quarterback position. I like top 10 overall additions, I should say. And Justin Fields is a player that we've all seen what he can do with his legs. He really hasn't had to go nuts. In week 1, he had like 14 rush attempts, but the production was not over the top. It was like less than 60 rushing yards. We're going to see a game where Justin Fields rips off a couple of long runs. He's going to start getting more comfortable in this offense. And also, he's looking more and more likely that he's going to hold this job for the rest of the season. How can you bench a guy who's winning game after game after game? So Justin Fields is a player that I value highly. Let's talk about Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones becomes a must-add for Superflex managers. And he has had back-to-back performances where he's had 2 touchdown passes. And the Giants beat the Browns. And this is a game where Daniel Jones is just starting to play solid. You're talking about a guy who's quarterback 13 on the season. He's right behind CJ Stroud in quarterback scoring. So this might slip a little bit, but Daniel Jones is a locked-in starter in Superflex leagues. This is a guy, we saw this happen a couple seasons ago, where Daniel Jones did enough with his legs that he finished as a QB1. I don't think he'll do that this year, but there's better offensive line play in New York this year than last year. I mean, how could it not be? And Malik Neighbors is absolutely just the truth. So Daniel Jones, a guy, if you're a super flex manager, you can go ahead and use him this week in your QB2 spot. Another player who's a super flex starter this week, Andy Dalton. He's the only player this entire season to pass for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in a single game. Andy Dalton is just playing phenomenal in his first game back. Like, they scored more points in the first half than they did in games 1 and 2 combined. So, like, Andy Dalton, I don't even know what this is. It's sort of like the Dave Canales is the QB whisperer was the whole thing we were saying this summer. And he just couldn't get it done with Bryce Young because Bryce Young is not a good player. But Andy Dalton, for whatever reason, feels comfortable in this offense. He did it last year where he stepped in one game and played really, really well. And Andy Dalton, I think this could hold. He's got some weapons that he seems to like there. Deontay Johnson, massive performance for him. He targeted Deontay Johnson 14 times. Exactly what we want to see if you're a Deontay Johnson manager. He also unlocked Chuba Hubbard, who ran well and had 50-plus receiving yards and a touchdown catch. And Carolina won convincingly against Las Vegas. So for me, it's like Andy Dalton, this is a super flex starter and really a must start in super flex. And we feel really good about the Carolina weapons. Now, Adam Thielen went down with an injury. Sounds like he's going to miss some time. We're going to talk about an Adam Thielen replacement a little later on when we talk about wide receivers. And we got to talk about Drake Maye. Drake Maye came off the bench, and New England lost to the Jets in a convincing fashion. Drake Maye's first start seems inevitable. He's got a rushing ability that elevates the fantasy floor. So Maye is like the speculative ad. So if you're in a single QB league and you want a speculative addition at quarterback, you're not going to go with Daniel Jones, Andy Dalton types. But Drake Maye is one you could roster behind your strong starter and maybe use him in bye weeks. With his rushing upside, he's interesting. Now a couple deep leaguers. Jameis Winston, if you're in a super flex league, Deshaun Watson looks horrible. And the chances that Jameis Winston gets some starts this year is going up and up with every Browns loss. And then these two players are like your just desperation plays. But in Superflex, every starting quarterback has some value. Taylor Heinicke and Tim Boyle, these two guys might get starts this week, but we're not going to talk about those guys. You don't want to hear about them. Running backs. Let's talk about Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson is my favorite running back this week. And Roschon is a player that we've been high on at Player Profiler for quite some time. And it really was like one where, hey, we're going to take the L on that one. He had to move down in the dynasty rankings here at Player Profiler just because, we're realistic here. We get things wrong occasionally. But Roschon Johnson is one where size, speed, performance at the Senior Bowl, played behind Bijan Robinson, had two-way ability, looked good catching the football last year in some limited sample size. So Roschon is a player that we didn't write off, but it was really disheartening in weeks 1 and 2 where he didn't get the usage. Now, Travis Hunter goes down and DeAndre Swift is playing awful. And also Chicago needs to figure something out because this whole offense is stuck in the mud. Caleb is really, really struggling. But Roschon Johnson had a solid week this past week. Again, DeAndre Swift, I don't think this would have happened with Roschon if DeAndre was playing exceptionally well. But Roschon had 62 combined yards. And like a normal Roschon game where he sees time, he caught passes. He got 4 catches. So you combine the rushing yardage and the receiving yardage, you get 60 plus with 4 catches. If he sees an increased role, I think he's going to be a solid floor play because he's a back who has size and pass catching ability. Somewhat like a Zach Charbonnet in that sense, where he has size and pass catching ability. Those sort of backs who have two-way ability and can stay on the field for 3 downs, these kind of guys have value in fantasy. Even if the offense is not great, Roschon will stay afloat with his pass catching ability. So we want to prioritize Roschon this week on the waiver wire in a chance that he has sort of a takeover here over DeAndre Swift. Now, he doesn't have the ceiling of a guy like Braelon Allen or a Bucky Irving. Don't get it twisted. But in terms of contingent upside, if Swift sort of gets brushed out of the way, and we sort of saw this last year. We saw this with DeAndre Swift DeAndre Swift. This is sort of reminds me a little bit of the Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders situation. And Miles Sanders was, of course, replaced by DeAndre Swift in Philly. But we saw Miles Sanders sign as a free agent. He was drafted similarly to DeAndre Swift this past year. And Chuba Hubbard just sort of took Miles Sanders' job. And that was over in Carolina. This sort of is happening in Chicago, where I think it could be Roschon. And we're also going to roster Khalil Herbert, who was tackled twice on the 1-yard line. But he's sort of like the break glass in case of emergency running back in Chicago, where if they change things philosophically and they're we need to run the ball a lot more, maybe they go with Khalil. So it's Roschon for me, and I'm going to bid a decent amount on him, not going nuts at all, but I'd like to add him to rosters. And Herbert's like that $1 bid where we could just add him in. And if there's change and we're wrong about Roschon, maybe we see some Herbert later in the year. It's not great in Chicago. We're looking for answers. Talking about Justice Hill. Justice Hill's available in over 85% of leagues. And he was a top 10 addition in week 2, had a very strong week 1 performance. And he had another solid game on Sunday's win over Dallas. it was obviously the Derrick Henry show, but Hill added 50 plus combined yards on 7 touches. If Derrick Henry misses time, Hill would be a huge fab addition. Tyler Beatty, well, it's actually pronounced Bidet, which who knew that? The guy played it. We never heard this at like Missouri. We never heard this at all in the NFL, but apparently it's Bidet. So I will pronounce it Tyler Bidet. Denver Broncos running back. Denver beat Tampa Bay. Bidet had the most productive rushing performance for the Broncos all season long, and they had their first win. This is a speculative addition. We don't want to like pay for last week's yards, and it's still kind of a mess of a team. Cortland Sutton, you could kind of expect his usage weekly. After that, we're still kind of playing a guessing game. I had Jaleel McLaughlin in the Sleepers video, but his production besides the touchdown was nothing impressive. Javonte can't run at all. So, like, we're looking for answers here in Denver. Audric Estime, when he comes off of the IR, is going to be an interesting player as well, just because of how bad this backfield looks. One player who I was very impressed with and could have easily made my top 10 was Emanuel Wilson of the Green Bay Packers. Wilson had a very solid game in week 1, and then he took a back seat in week 2, and Josh Jacobs had this incredible, like, historical performance against Indianapolis. Jacobs had, like, the most rushing yards of any Green Bay Packer in the first half since, like, Amon Green in, like, 2001. It was insane. But this past week, Green Bay was very smart. They're not overloading Josh Jacobs 2 weeks in a row, and Emanuel Wilson played really well. He actually looked sort of like we wanted Marshawn Lloyd to look, but Marshawn Lloyd, of course, is on the IR. But he's like a change of pace back with size and two-way ability. Wilson had 85 combined yards and a touchdown. He should be rostered. If Josh Jacobs went down, Emanuel Wilson would be like a 50% fab guy right now, the way he's playing. So why not grab him for cheap and get him on your roster? And if you have Josh Jacobs, make sure you're rostering Emanuel Wilson now. You know that this offense is being successful running the ball. I think having a backup to Jacobs would make sense. And if you don't want to do that, then roster Marshawn Lloyd for when he comes back. Let's talk about Tank Bigsby. I'm recording this before Monday Night Football. Tank Bigsby played so well in week 1 and then obviously was banged up in week 2. This is a player where he's available in a ton of leagues. We've already seen him perform well once this season. Jacksonville is struggling. I think if Jacksonville has a poor performance tonight, there could be a shakeup, and you could see some more increased usage for Bigsby. So again, recording this before Monday Night Football, so we'll keep an eye on that after. But I want to roster Bigsby. I already have him on a lot of rosters. We had him in the top 10 overall week 1. Antonio Gibson had a really strong week 2, came back to earth against the Jets. Jets completely manhandled the Patriots, but Gibson had 8 touches. He's the next man in line if Ramondre Stevenson misses time in New England, and they are featuring their running backs quite frequently. Ray Davis. Davis is a guy, again, recording this before Monday Night Football, but Ray Davis, I put him in my top 10 this week because we're already seeing it like with Braelon Allen, with Bucky Irving, where these guys start getting increased usage, increased opportunities. Now with Ray Davis, we're not going to see that because James Cook is just playing so well, and Buffalo seems to be going with a single back approach. But Davis is already earning weekly touches, not enough to make a fantasy impact, but Davis is a guy where he's a like-for-like replacement for James Cook. James Cook in the Joe Brady era has averaged 17.5 points per game. I think Ray Davis would give you like 14 points a game, 13.5 points per game if James Cook were to miss time. I think he'd be a locked-in RB2, can catch the football, and also he's an older rookie, was in college a long time, 3 colleges, Temple, Vandy, and Kentucky, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in the SEC. Ray Davis can play. Another older rookie running back who's starting to get work, Tyrone Tracy. We talked about Daniel Jones. We're going to talk about Wan'Dale Robinson later, but these Giants are playing better football than we anticipated. They've had back-to-back games that were competitive. They lost to Washington in a competitive close game, and then they beat the Browns, who are kind of a mess right now. But they're getting pressure on the opposing quarterback, and they have Malik Neighbors. Having Malik Neighbors makes your team better because he's unbelievable. But Tyrone Tracy, another rookie on the team, big-time athlete. He had 7 touches in Sunday's win over Cleveland. If Devin Singletary went down, Tyrone Tracy would be a really fun player to roster. Also got to remind you, Tyler Algier. He's still available in like 75% of leagues, like for like, not really like for like in terms of talent, but he would be a like for like replacement in terms of role in Atlanta. So I don't want to confuse anybody. He's not Bijan Robinson, but his role would be similar to Bijan Robinson if Bijan Robinson missed time. So Tyler Algier, we want to roster handcuffs. Those guys pop every single season. Tyler Algier, widely available. If he's available in your league off of no production, just add him. It's a speculative lottery ticket type ad. Now, here's a fun one for people in big trouble this week. And there's a lot of you out there dealing with a lot of injuries. This could be a fun, well, I don't know if we call it fun. This could be a utility type week out of Cordarrelle Patterson, where we could use Cordarrelle Patterson in a flex or an RB2 if we are in big time trouble with a bunch of injuries. Najee Harris was in a sling today, and Jalen Warren looks like he's going to miss some time, getting an MRI, hamstring, and Jalen Warren was starting to cut into Najee Harris's workload. So even if Harris plays, a second back's going to get worked in. Cordarrelle Patterson had 48 combined yards in week 3's win over LA. We all know Arthur Smith loves Cordarrelle Patterson. Patterson had that really random RB1 season under Smith in Smith's first year in Atlanta. And Patterson followed him to Pittsburgh. So there's a real connection there. If it's a 1 week Cordarrelle Patterson week, it could be one where it gets you by. 2 New Orleans Saints running backs, both available in 95% of leagues or more. Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. Alvin Kamara playing really well. Alvin Kamara also getting a ton of volume. And Alvin Kamara is 29 years old. If you believe that Alvin Kamara is going to break down, then one of these two guys should be on your roster. The more exciting one to add to me is Kendre Miller, who's coming off of the IR shortly. Jamal Williams, if Alvin Kamara went down at practice tomorrow, Jamal Williams would start the next game. But Kendre Miller, 3rd round pick out of TCU, seemed to be absolutely hated by the coaching staff, but he's still here. Taysom Hill's banged up. Alvin Kamara's 29. This is just more of a, again, speculative lottery ticket type player for your bench. Now, we talked about it earlier. Christian McCaffrey is in Germany seeing doctors. You don't have any doctors in the Bay Area or somewhere in America that could help you out? I'm this makes me very nervous that the guy's going overseas. You've seen this with NBA players. If you recall, one of the GOATs of all time, Kobe Bryant, went overseas to see specialists. You hear about, NBA players, stud NBA players going overseas to see specialists. I don't know. It's not good. It's not a good thing. If anybody could cite in the chat an NFL player who's gone to Europe to see a specialist and then came back and played this season, let me know, because right now I'm thinking there's a non-zero chance that Christian McCaffrey's season is done. If I'm right on this, you should be going and trading for Jordan Mason, even though it seems like a high trade value right now. And you're seeing dynasty leagues where Jordan Mason's gone for a future first. Redraft leagues, you're seeing Jordan Mason being treated like he's every bit an RB1. But if Christian McCaffrey's not coming back, then not only should we be trying to acquire Jordan Mason, but we should be adding Isaac Guerendo. Isaac Guerendo is a big-time athlete. Much like a lot of these running backs in this rookie class, Guerendo's next level athlete, though. He's got size, speed combination. He's available everywhere. He had 5 carries in week 3, no production. But again, if Jordan Mason goes down, Isaac Guerendo. Khalil Herbert, we talked about earlier, $1, $0 bid type guy. I think that's all the running backs. If I missed a running back, drop it in the chat. We'll try to get to it. Wide receivers, Jauan Jennings. Jauan Jennings, how can we not have him as a top 3 addition this week? He just squeaks into the availability. He's available in 70% of leagues. I had him last week in the sleeper video. I told everybody to start him, and I still had leagues where he's on my bench last week. I had him in a bunch of places, but he only made it into a couple of lineups. So that's awesome. But I had leagues where I'm I can't start him over Demarcus Robinson. I'm going to go with Demarcus Robinson. And then you end up just being angry all day long about missing out on this sort of an output. But Jauan Jennings, we've seen his best game, and we've seen his best game as a pro now. That was incredible. Deebo Samuel, any week he's out, though, Jauan Jennings can be treated as a wide receiver 3. And we want to elevate him with George Kittle out as well. So, Jauan Jennings, if we have another week with no Deebo, another week with no Kittle, Jauan Jennings, absolutely got to put in your lineup. I want to put one little warning here. people are going to overpay for that sort of production. Don't let that be you. Like, do a price check bid for Jauan Jennings. Maybe you're in a really sharp league where people are like, I'm not going to pay that much for this. This guy's not a 50% fab guy, even though he put up a number that would be like an 80% fab guy. Let's take a step back here. This could be like a Noah Brown situation from last year where we had like 3 really strong weeks in a row. And we were really happy to have Noah Brown. We had him on these waiver wire columns last year, but like Noah Brown did it for a few weeks and then sort of faded. We don't want to do that here with Jennings. I think he's a little bit more static than Noah Brown, who seemed to be like a kind of a transient player. Obviously, he's in Washington this year, but Jauan Jennings, they paid. He knows the system, and he's got contingent value, obviously, when Debo's out. Let's flip over to a wide receiver that I think you can get in a lot of leagues, and we're talking about Darnell Mooney. Now, Darnell Mooney, back-to-back strong games, 8 targets for 8 catches on 8 targets for 66 yards in week 3. And then he had 88 yards and a touchdown in week 2. He's trending up, and he could have wide receiver 3 value all season. Mooney's performance is like, we got to remind ourselves, this is a guy that was really strong. Then last year took a big step back, had tightrope surgery, never really recovered, and took a huge step back in Chicago. But now in Atlanta, they seem to like him. They gave him a big free agent contract, and he's starting to play really well. 2 strong weeks. He's the guy who could end up finishing as a wide receiver 3, and he's not like super expensive. He makes our top 5 overall this week. Then we got to talk about Josh Downs. I had Josh Downs as a top 10 addition last week, and I was very intrigued by the usage. The production was not there, but in his first game back, he had a 28% target share, and he played in the slot 90% of the time. Josh Downs is going to have some strong games this season. And I think his presence, one guy who, like, as a bonus, a player that I would look to trade away in a couple of redraft formats, if people want to still pay you like he's close to his 2023 production, it's just not happening for Michael Pittman. And you have to look back at last year and the beginning of this year. You're not seeing those sort of spike performances. That's a player you try to move in a 2-for-1 trade. I think Downs and Pittman could be close to one another. Downs is on the waiver wire, and Pittman was the guy people were drafting early. Talking about Wan'Dale Robinson. Wan'Dale Robinson, quiet week 2, but added another solid performance in Sunday's win over Cleveland. 7 catches, 61 yards on 8 targets. Wan'Dale's pacing for like a 20+% target share season and could sneak and be like a 23.5, 24% target share guy. Secondary target to Malik Neighbors, but his targets per route runner high, and they're using him. This is actually a fun offense for us in fantasy because it's easy to predict. It's Malik Neighbors as much as he can handle, Devin Singletary, and then Wan'Dale Robinson. So it's a predictable weekly offense, which is what we like to see. Wan'Dale's a guy we're going to look to plug in during some of these bye weeks, and those are right around the corner. Let's keep this thing going at the wide receiver spot. Xavier Legette. I like late Xavier Legette a lot. You're talking about a player that has big-time athleticism and now has an opportunity. First-round NFL draft pick. And this is we like sort of like all the Carolina Panthers right now with Andy Dalton behind center. This offense looks like it's going to be a high-volume attack. And Xavier Legette now gets to step in right for Adam Thielen. He's going to be like the number 2 target in this offense. Xavier Legette is a big-time athlete. Think about like a A.J. Brown-like athlete, size. This is a guy who's an older player. So a lot of the dynasty community did not rate him. We obviously didn't have him as high in the dynasty rankings because this was a late breakout player, but he was a first-round draft pick. So Xavier Legette's a player that I'm valuing this week on the waiver wire. Talking about Tutu Atwell. Tutu Atwell is the Ram that we weren't talking about. Like, I talked a lot about Tyler Johnson. We talked about Robinson. We talked about Jordan Whittington. But Atwell was the one making big plays this past week. Rams beat the 49ers. Atwell had a 50-yard, fourth quarter, big-time catch that helped the Rams win that game. Atwell has earned more of a role this week. We had him in this waiver wire column and video last year. If you recall, towards the beginning of the season, when it was like the Puka Nacua breakout, you also had the Tutu Atwell breakout, which was nothing even close to the same. But Atwell did give you like a couple of weeks where he was like a wide receiver 3. Maybe this is the start of something. Super skinny, super small, but really, really fast. He's just a hard player to predict his weekly usage. So don't go overpaying for that 90-yard performance. But if you want to throw a couple bucks on him, especially in leagues like the NFFC where it's wide receiver heavy, go for it. Jalen Nailor. Jalen Nailor, 2 weeks in a row with a touchdown catch. We talked about Darnold and how he's our top ad. Jalen Nailor, I had him in the waiver wire column last week. We also had him in the sleeper video. He ends up catching a touchdown 2 weeks in a row with a touchdown catch. Nailor is one we want to keep an eye on to see if the volume starts to increase. But a fair warning, when Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson come back, Nailor is going to take a back seat. Pop Douglas, New England, which is Demario Douglas, in case somebody's like, who's Pop? Demario Douglas, New England, available in like 95% of leagues, had 9 targets, 6 catches this past week. And 3 of those targets came from Drake Maye on the final drive. So this offense is going to look different. Demario Douglas and Jalen Polk are just sitting there on the waiver wire. If you want to speculate that Drake Maye is going to change things in New England, maybe make it a little less running back centric, then invest in one of these New England wide receivers just as a speculation play. They're both basically free. Jalen Polk, the second-round pick, rookie. Demario Douglas, the second-year player who was a day 3 player last year but had some several wide receiver 3 finishes, weekly finishes. We got to talk about Mike Williams. He's back, getting healthy, and his game sort of correlates with Aaron Rodgers. He had 4 targets. He caught 3 of them. The Jets were on cruise control against the Patriots. Allen Lazard catches a touchdown. Garrett Wilson catches a touchdown. The running back's getting a lot of use. Tyler Conklin played well. So we didn't really see like the full Mike Williams experience. And I do think there's a chance that Williams and Allen Lazard cannibalize one another. And neither one of them is a guy you're that excited about having. They seem to have a little bit of a superfluous skill set where they're both going to be like end zone targets, where if they score a touchdown, you're feeling great. If they don't, maybe not. But I will defer to Williams as the preferred one. Lazard has 3 touchdown catches this year, so most of your league will pay for that. And Lazard is probably the more likely to be rostered right now. Williams is available in far more leagues right now. But Williams, we've seen him have spike weeks over the years. We saw him have spike weeks early last year in LA. And he his skill set meshes well with Aaron Rodgers, as does Lazard, really. Take your shot on one of these guys. Don't roster both of them, but take your shot on one of these guys and leave them on your roster, kind of see where it goes. Maybe one separates from one another. If you had to start one this week, like really had to start one, you're in dire straits, go with Lazard because he's been playing pretty well for Rodgers. Had a touchdown, 3 on the season. One wide receiver that makes my top 10, and I'll probably be higher on this player than other people writing waiver wire columns, because it's a player that I've been on for a while, Michael Wilson. Wilson's been a frequent visitor to this column, was a 3rd-round draft pick out of Stanford for Arizona. We kept having him in this video and in our waiver wire column last year, and it just never popped. He had that one really big game against Dallas last year, but for the most part, it was like just miss type stuff. Maybe it's starting to come together for him. But the reason I'm so bullish on Wilson is I think Trey McBride might miss this week with a possible concussion-like symptoms. So Wilson, if McBride misses this week, Wilson's the guy I want to put in my flex, because Washington, and again, recording this before Monday Night Football, Washington has been extremely generous to opposing wide receivers. So Wilson is one where I want to take shots on. I prefer him to Greg Dortch. I don't think it's even close. Wilson can do a lot more. He's got a higher ceiling. 8 catches on 9 targets this past week. I think that this is one he could be a fun start against Washington. Jordan Whittington. We talked about Atwell. If you want to play the long game here in LA, Whittington caught 3 passes, had 3 targets. Quiet game, but we're starting to see the rookie on the field. We saw him ball out in the preseason. Jordan Whittington speculation. Calvin Austin, available everywhere, had probably his best game of the season. Caught 95 yards and a touchdown, 4 catches. Austin's always been like this speed demon wide receiver where you couldn't really predict his weekly usage. I don't think he's going to be anything different this year, but he's worth mentioning if you're in a deep league. He now has a spot because Van Jefferson is banged up. Greg Dortch, we talked about him. If Michael Wilson's rostered and Trey McBride's out, we can use Greg Dortch because Washington's such a good matchup for Arizona next week. Tight ends. My favorite tight end, and I think we could have seen him being sort of unlocked this week, Tyler Conklin. Conklin had his best game of the season by far. He had 5 catches for 93 yards. And Conklin's a player, it's actually like impressive and also super weird. But Tyler Conklin's had 3 straight seasons with 87 targets in each season. It's one of the weirdest stats in the NFL, but it shows that he earns targets. So Tyler Conklin, 5 catches, 93 yards. We see Braelon Allen in his weekly role. We see Mike Williams coming back. The Jets are starting to like figure themselves out. 2 straight wins, and Tyler Conklin has a strong game. I think Tyler Conklin, he's one that I've moved up in the waiver wire rankings this week because I've seen him play well for a couple seasons, and this could be an elevation for him with Aaron Rodgers behind center. So I have him in my top 10 this week. And one of the main reasons I have him there is because tight end's been such a dumpster fire. Mark Andrews doing nothing. George Kittle hurt. Sam Laporta hurt. Trey McBride might miss this week. There's multiple. David Njoku hurt. We have all these tight ends. Evan Ingram still out. So like we have all these issues at tight end. Tyler Conklin could be like a life vest for some of you. Noah Fant, 6 catches, 6 targets. I'm bullish on the Seattle offense. I want to roster Seahawks, and the only one available to me with a full-time role, Noah Fant, available in like 70% of leagues. I want Ryan Grubb-led offense players. I'll take a shot on Noah Fant, see where this goes. And if I'm going to spot start somebody, I'd rather have somebody on the Seahawks than spot start somebody on a bad offense. Speaking of guys I don't want to use in spot starts, Cade Otton. Every year I have to write about Cade Otton, and I have to discuss him in this waiver wire video slash article. Waiver Wired is also a podcast. I hope you're subscribed to that. But Cade Otton, I have to talk about him every year because he has a game like this. He did this past week where Tampa Bay was playing in catch-up mode, where they were come from behind against Denver. They had multiple opportunities to pass, and Cade Otton had 6 catches. Just need to mention it. Cade Otton had a couple of usable games last year, but he's very much like your boring floor play tight end where I'd much rather have Tyler Conklin. I'd much rather have Noah Fant than Cade Otton. My partner over at First Class Fantasy, Billy Muzio, always a Cade Otton fan. Got to ask him why he's a Cade Otton fan, but we'll figure that out someday. Zach Ertz. Ertz, again, recording this before Monday Night Football, but Ertz had his best game of the season in week 2, had 4 catches, 62 yards. Looks like he could be the safety blanket receiver for Jaden Daniels. Ben Sinnott not getting playing time. Dynasty managers, make sure you're rostering Eric All. Eric All had 4 catches for 32 yards in week 2. Priority for dynasty managers, could earn more of a role as the season goes on. And we won't really know Mike Gesicki's true role until after tonight with T. Higgins. So Gesicki's playing fantastic, but is he more of a piece that they've leaned on because T. Higgins wasn't there? Or is he a guy who's going to be like a out of nowhere tight end 1 this year? We'll find out. But Eric All is the long-term answer at tight end for Cincinnati. If you're in a dynasty league, go get him. Available in a ton of them. Colby Parkinson, I was way too bullish on him. I'll take the L. Maybe he turns it around. He's on the field the whole time, but we haven't seen that sort of production post Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua injury with Parkinson yet. Maybe we see it. He's on the field the whole time. They gave him a big contract. So it's really just getting a piece of the McVay offense with a open target tree. But Parkinson hasn't really done anything since that first half of game 1. Now let's talk about 2 deep sleeper tight ends. And this would be potentially like a 1 week or in some cases a few week guy. Brock Wright. If Sam Laporta is gone out for a few games, Brock Wright would slip right into the tight end role and be on the field a ton. We don't want to go overbidding, but if you're in like dire straits at tight end, Brock Wright could give you like a 1 or 2 week fill in. Elijah Higgins. This is a fun one. If you're looking for a 1 week start at tight end, Elijah Higgins caught a touchdown in week 1. Again, we're going up against a positive matchup against that Washington Commanders team. Arizona coming off of a loss. Higgins could be a fun one if Trey McBride misses. Now, if Trey McBride plays or if Sam Laporta plays, then both of these guys forget I even talked about him. You're never going to get that 30 seconds back. But Higgins is a converted wide receiver, a lot of athleticism. So let's talk about the top 10 overall. And if you like this video, make sure you like it on YouTube. And if you're listening to it as a podcast, make sure you're subscribed to Waiver Wired or subscribe to the Player Profiler Podcast Network. You can get us both places, but we're trying to help you win on the wire every single week. Hopefully this has been beneficial to you. Now, a quick reminder, I don't include the shallow league ads in this overall top 10. So if Bucky Irving or Braelon Allen are available in your league, it's time to make it rain fab, because these two guys could have lasting impacts for the entire season. They're both really, really good at football. And both of these guys have like the contingent upside to help you win a fantasy league. But if they're both rostered like they should be and probably are in your league, then this is the top 10 of all the players I discussed who were not shallow league additions. Let's talk about Sam Darnold at 1. This is like your long-term potential answer at quarterback. I think he finishes as a QB1 this year. He's earned a ton of money this year based on his early play. And this is a coaching staff that got several more weeks of quarterback 1 performances out of guys like Josh Dobbs and out of Nick Mullins last year. So Darnold, his performance just has been great, and I actually think it keeps up. They've got a huge one against Green Bay this week. Minnesota's 3-0 with Darnold. I think they can beat the Packers this week as well. So Darnold is the number 1 ad. Jauan Jennings as the number 2 addition. We all saw what he did this past week. Roschon Johnson at 3. I'll be a little bit aggressive on him. If you don't like Roschon and you think this is too aggressive, then go with one of my next 2. Darnell Mooney at 4, wide receiver. We talked about him earlier. Justin Fields at quarterback. So your top 5 is Sam Darnold, Jauan Jennings, Roschon Johnson, Darnell Mooney, Justin Fields. Now 6, we're going to adjust this player if Trey McBride plays. But if Trey McBride misses, then Michael Wilson gets bumped up. So I put Michael Wilson at 6 overall on the chance you get him as the number 2 option against Washington. And even if McBride plays, Wilson's still a dart throw, but he'd probably be closer to 10. 7 is Tyler Conklin. 8 is Xavier Legette. 9 is Josh Downs. And then at 10, it's a tie with Ray Davis, Tank Bigsby. And then I want to go honorable mention to Emanuel Wilson. I want to add him in a bunch of places as well. I'm Theo Gremminger. We're going to be here every single week at Waiver Wired. We're going to help you win your fantasy league. Keep grinding. This season's been a tough one with all the injuries, but we're going to keep hitting this waiver wire each and every week. We're going to see you back here real soon.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.